My name is Emma Pearson. I'm 27 years old, and I'm a captain in the United States Army. And my sister's lavish Dallas wedding just became a family crisis. Right in the middle of her wedding reception, my own mother screamed at me, "You are so selfish, Emma. Your sister deserves this more than you." Her voice echoing down the marble hallway. "What did you do to him? Did you poison a confused old man to steal your sister's future?" She poked her finger into my chest. "Madison is building a brand. She needs that money. What do you have? A uniform and some cheap patriotism. You are just a selfish, useless girl." She, my father, my sister. They all thought they had me backed into a corner. They thought I was alone. But they don't know that in the Army, we are taught to document everything. And my grandfather's last phone call, the one where he revealed the whole truth, was recorded. Before I play that recording and bring their entire fake world crashing down, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you believe that the truth is the most powerful weapon against injustice. The confrontation in the hallway left a ringing in my ears, but I walked back into the grand ballroom with my training kicking in, shoulders back, spine straight, head high. The room was a classic Dallas spectacle, a sea of glittering chandeliers, floral arrangements so large they could hide a person, and the soft, elegant sounds of a string quartet. To anyone watching, I was just a guest returning to her seat. But inside, I felt like a soldier walking back onto a battlefield after being ambushed, the shock still vibrating through my bones. I found my table, a lonely island near the back, and sat down. Just in time for my father, Gary Pearson, to take the stage. The spotlight hit him, and he beamed, holding a champagne flute. "To my daughter," he began, his voice smooth and practiced, "the jewel of our family." He spent the next 15 minutes painting a portrait of Madison. He called her an inspiration, our shining star. He told stories of her first business venture at 12, selling her old designer clothes online, and framed it as early genius. He praised her lifestyle blog, her impeccable taste, her vision. He spoke as if he were presenting a perfect, flawless product to a room of investors. And through it all, he never once glanced in my direction. He never mentioned my name. It was as if he only had one daughter. In that crowded, opulent room, in front of hundreds of people who had known me my whole life, my own father erased me. The pain was sharper than my mother's insults. It wasn't a slap. It was a public execution of my existence. I could feel a hollow space opening up in my chest, a void where a daughter's place should have been. From the table next to mine, I heard a woman whisper to her friend, "Didn't the Pearsons have another daughter?" A little while later, Madison floated over to my table. Her smile was blinding, a perfect arrangement of white teeth, but her eyes were as cold and hard as diamonds. "Emma," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Thank you for coming." She placed a sleek, heavy box on the table in front of me. "I have a gift for you. Just a little something so you'll always remember family." I opened it. It was an expensive digital photo frame, the kind that cycles through hundreds of pictures. But as it lit up, my breath caught in my throat. The first image was Madison at her college graduation, tossing her cap in the air. Then Madison on a beach in Greece, laughing. Madison getting engaged, showing off a ring the size of a small rock. It was a never-ending loop of my sister's perfect life. My image, my existence, was nowhere to be found. I picked out all our family's best moments, she added, the final, deliberate twist of the knife. Her words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. Our family. A family in which I was apparently not a part. I couldn't form a single word in response. I just nodded, my throat tightening into a knot, the muscles refusing to work. I felt like I was choking. After his speech, my father made his way to my table. He didn't come to apologize. He came to deliver an ultimatum. He placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that was supposed to look paternal and comforting to anyone watching from afar. But up close, his grip was firm. And his voice was a low, menacing whisper meant only for me. "Emma, I know you're upset," he said, not even making eye contact, his gaze sweeping the room to ensure his performance was being appreciated. "But it's time to do the right thing. Sign the papers. Transfer the estate to your sister. Don't turn this into an ugly mess." He squeezed my shoulder. I've spent my entire life building my reputation in this city. I will not let you destroy it over a little bit of selfishness. There it was. Not my pain, not my grandfather's wishes, not the truth. Only his reputation. The betrayal from him, from the man who was supposed to be my protector, sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the ballroom's air conditioning. He wasn't my father in that moment. He was just another enemy combatant, using psychological tactics to achieve an objective. The final assault came during the cutting of the cake. It was a towering 7-tiered monster of white fondant and sugar flowers. As Madison and her new husband posed for the cameras, she made her move. With a theatrical little gasp, she tripped, stumbling just enough to send a full glass of dark red wine splashing directly onto the front of my ivory-colored dress. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, Emma. I'm just so clumsy," she exclaimed, her hand flying to her mouth in mock horror. But for a split second, I saw it. A flash of pure, unadulterated triumph in her eyes. The room went quiet. Every eye turned to me. I was no longer an invisible ghost. I was a spectacle, a stain, a mess in the middle of their perfect party. The dark red liquid bloomed across the fabric like a fresh wound. Then, my mother was at my side. She didn't offer a napkin. She didn't try to help. She leaned in close, her perfume cloying and suffocating, and whispered venomously into my ear. "You see?" she hissed. "You don't belong here. Get out, before you ruin anything else." It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. The final, perfectly orchestrated public humiliation. My expulsion. I stood there for a moment, the wine cold against my skin, the stares of the crowd like physical blows. And then I turned and walked away. I left the laughter, the music, and the charade behind. Back in the quiet of my hotel room, the digital frame sat on the nightstand, its cold blue light the only thing illuminating the darkness. It silently cycled through Madison's life, a constant mocking reminder of a family I never truly had. The cold, blue light of the digital frame was the only thing moving in the hotel room. It pulsed silently, cycling through a life that wasn't mine. Madison graduating, Madison in Europe. Madison, Madison, Madison. Each bright, perfect image was a fresh insult, another confirmation of my erasure. I stared at the screen, at the hollow perfection of it all, and my mind drifted away from the sterile, air-conditioned silence of the room. It traveled back in time, back to a place of genuine warmth, to a different kind of picture. Not the glossy, perfect images on a screen, but the faded, black-and-white photos tucked into dusty albums at my grandfather's ranch. My grandfather, Jack Pearson, lived on a sprawling property near Fort Hood, Texas. My parents' house in Dallas smelled of potpourri and expensive cleaning products, a constant, sterile floral scent. Grandpa Jack's place smelled of machine oil, sawdust, and old leather. It smelled real. While Madison was at ballet lessons, learning poise and grace, I was in his workshop. That workshop was my first real sanctuary. It wasn't a place for a little girl, my mother always said. It was dirty, full of sharp things. But to me, it was a cathedral of history. I spent hours there, carefully polishing his military medals while he worked on an old engine. He didn't talk to me like a child. He talked to me like a teammate. He'd hand me a wrench and say, "Hold this steady, trooper." He taught me the difference between a Phillips and a flathead screwdriver before I knew how to properly braid my hair. One afternoon, I was holding his Purple Heart, feeling the weight of it in my small hand. I asked him if it was an award for being the bravest. He stopped what he was doing and looked at me, his eyes serious. "This isn't a prize, Emma," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "It's a reminder. It's a reminder that freedom has a price, and good people pay it." He explained what each medal meant, not as a trophy, but as a story of a friend, a battle, a promise kept. In that dusty workshop surrounded by old tools and the ghosts of his memories, I learned the meaning of honor. It was a language my parents didn't speak. Years later, when my acceptance letter to West Point arrived, my parents threw a perfunctory dinner party. It felt more like a business obligation than a celebration. They invited their friends, toasted my ambition, and then quickly changed the subject. The next day, Grandpa Jack drove 3 hours from the ranch just to see me. He didn't bring a fancy gift. He brought an old, tattered letter, the paper yellowed and soft with age, the creases worn through. "This was the first letter I ever wrote to your grandma," he said, his eyes welling up with tears. "I was in a trench in Vietnam. I want you to have it. So you remember that no matter how far away you are, there's always someone waiting for you to come home." He pulled me into a hug, his embrace strong and sure. And then he held me at arm's length, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "You are my pride, Captain." He called me Captain. Long before I'd earned the rank, long before I'd led a single soldier, he saw it in me. That single word from him was worth more than 1,000 empty compliments from my parents. It was the most valuable recognition of my life. It was a confirmation that I was on the right path, my path, not the one they had tried to design for me. When Grandpa Jack got sick, the contrast between my sister and me became a chasm. Madison visited him once in the hospital. She took a smiling selfie by his bedside, posted it on Instagram with the caption, "My heart is breaking seeing my hero like this," and left 20 minutes later. I took all of my accumulated leave from the Army and spent every minute I could with him. I read him chapters from old Western novels. I wiped his brow with a cool cloth, and sometimes we just sat in silence. The quiet hum of the hospital machines, the only sound between us. During one of his last lucid moments, he grabbed my hand. His grip was surprisingly strong, a final surge of the powerful man he once was. His eyes, though clouded with pain, were sharp and focused on mine. "Don't let them turn our legacy into money, Emma," he whispered, his voice a ragged breath. "They don't understand. It's not about the land or the stocks." He squeezed my hand. "It's honor. Protect it." It wasn't a dying wish. It was a direct order. I thought back to another quiet evening, years before, in his study. He had pulled a well-worn paperback from his bookshelf and handed it to me. The cover was creased, the corners soft. It was Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher. "This is the soldier's Bible," Grandpa Jack had told me. He was a general and an emperor, the most powerful man in the world, but he knew that real strength doesn't come from a title or an army. It comes from in here. He tapped his chest. "This book will teach you how to control what you can and how to accept what you can't." That book became my guide. Marcus Aurelius, a warrior philosopher, taught me that true power came from internal discipline, not from the approval of others. His writings gave me a framework for my own life, a way to build an inner fortress that couldn't be breached by my mother's criticism or my father's indifference. It was the philosophy of a soldier, and it had forged the resilience I now clung to. These were the memories that flooded my mind as I sat in that silent hotel room. This was the man they were accusing me of manipulating. The man who had built me, who had given me my moral compass, my strength, my very identity. The fight wasn't about a will. It was about defending the only true legacy I'd ever been given. I pulled out my phone and found the file. It was the last call, the one I had recorded. I pressed play, and his voice, weak but clear, filled the silence. "Emma," he said, and just hearing my name in his voice strengthened my resolve. "Promise me, Emma." Grandpa Jack's voice from the recording faded, leaving an even deeper silence in the hotel room. His last words weren't a plea, they were a transfer of command. "Protect it." The order echoed in my head, clear and precise. And a soldier, when given an order, executes the mission. There was no more time for grief or shock. It was time to act. I didn't go back to the hotel they had booked for me. I didn't even pack the few things I'd brought. I walked out of that first hotel, hailed a cab, and told the driver, "DFW Airport." The decision was instant, a tactical retreat. I couldn't fight this war from inside their stronghold. Dallas was their territory, a city woven together by my father's influence and my mother's social connections. I needed neutral ground, a place to regroup, resupply, and plan my counteroffensive. At 2 in the morning, Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport is an eerie, cavernous place. The usual chaotic energy was gone, replaced by the low hum of cleaning machines and the stark, sterile glare of fluorescent lights on polished floors. I was a ghost in a stained ballroom gown, my hair still pinned up. A walking contradiction in that empty terminal. I walked up to a self-service kiosk, the screen casting a cold glow on my face, and booked a one-way ticket to Austin on the first flight out. No return date. This wasn't a retreat, it was a redeployment. As the plane finally took off, breaking through the clouds into the first light of dawn, I watched the Dallas skyline shrink behind me. For the first time, I felt a strange, conflicting mix of crushing loneliness and absolute freedom. I landed in Austin and checked into a cheap motel off the highway, the kind with worn carpets and a lingering smell of disinfectant. The luxury of the Dallas wedding felt like a scene from someone else's life. After a quick shower, I started making calls. I had to believe I wasn't entirely alone. I had friends from high school, people I'd known for over a decade. I started with Mark, who was now a lawyer at a big firm downtown. I explained everything: the will, my mother's accusations, my father's threats. I could hear him shifting uncomfortably on the other end of the line. There was a long pause before he finally spoke. "Wow, Emma, that's terrible," he said, his voice laced with caution. "I'm so sorry you're going through this." Another pause. "But, your dad's company is a major client of our firm. A huge one, actually. I can't get involved. It would be professional suicide." His apology was sincere, but his refusal was absolute. The door slammed shut. Next, I called Sarah, who worked for a local news station. I thought maybe she could offer some advice, some way to get ahead of the story I knew my mother would eventually spin to the media. Her reaction was even quicker. "Oh, Emma, no," she said, almost in a panic. "I can't cross your mother, Diane Pearson. She has friends at every station in Texas. My career would be over before it started. I'm sorry, I just can't." Click. With each call, the walls closed in. The power and influence my parents wielded wasn't just a vague concept. It was a tangible, invisible fortress. And its walls were made of the silence of people I once called my friends. I was a commander with no army, a soldier with no allies. The bitter truth settled in my stomach like a stone. I was completely on my own. As if on cue, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I answered it. A tearful, trembling voice came through the speaker. It was Maria, our family's housekeeper for over 20 years. "Captain Emma," she sobbed, "I am so sorry. I had to call you." She told me that my mother, Diane, had gone into a rage that morning. She'd ordered a junk removal crew to my childhood bedroom. Not to pack it, but to clear it out. She had them throw everything in boxes and put them on the curb. "Like trash, miss, like trash." My blood ran cold. "Everything?" "Everything," Maria whispered, her voice breaking. "Your books, your awards from school, the letters from your grandpa, even the framed photo of you and your unit in Afghanistan. She said you were no longer her daughter." I thanked her quietly and hung up the phone, my heart constricting in my chest. This was more than just disowning me. This was an attempt to erase my entire history, to wipe my existence from the very foundation of that house. Every memory, every achievement, every piece of my life that wasn't tied to them, tossed to the curb. It was a final, brutal act of severance. That night, sleep was impossible. The motel room felt like a prison cell. I was exhausted, defeated, and utterly alone. If you have ever felt that kind of loneliness, where it feels like the whole world has turned its back on you, hit that like button and let me know I'm not the only one by commenting, "You are not alone," below. In the drawer of the cheap nightstand, my hand brushed against a book. I pulled it out. It was a Gideon Bible, standard issue for motels across America. I wasn't a particularly religious person, but in the depths of my despair, I opened it. My eyes landed on a verse in the book of Isaiah, chapter 41, verse 10. The words seemed to lift off the page. "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. It wasn't a promise of victory. It wasn't a strategic plan. But reading those ancient words in that cheap motel room in the darkest hour of my life, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. It was a promise of an ally, an assurance that I was not, in fact, entirely alone. That night, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I slept. The morning after finding solace in a stranger's Bible, I woke up feeling different. The exhaustion was still there, a heavy weight in my bones, but the crushing despair had lifted, replaced by a quiet, fragile calm. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was just the absence of panic. I knew the fight was still ahead, and I still had no allies, no plan, and barely any money. Forcing myself out of bed, I made a cup of the terrible motel coffee and opened my laptop, intending to start the daunting task of finding a lawyer who wasn't afraid of my father's shadow. That's when I saw it. An email in my inbox sent just an hour earlier. The subject line made my breath catch in my throat. Captain Pearson, do you remember me? My heart started to pound. I clicked it open. The sender was a man named David Chen. For a moment, the name didn't register. Then, the memory hit me like a physical force. Sergeant Chen, a young, brilliant intelligence analyst who had served under my command in Afghanistan. A quiet kid, always focused, always 3 steps ahead of the enemy. I read his message, my eyes scanning the words faster and faster. Captain, it began, the formal title a jolt of respect in a world that had just called me worthless. A mutual friend from our service days mentioned he'd heard you were going through a difficult time back home. I looked you up and found a few articles. I'm not sure if you know, but I left the Army a few years ago. I'm a lawyer in Austin now, specializing in estate law and veterans' rights. He continued. Captain, I was there on that patrol outside Kandahar. I was the one who missed the pressure plate on that IED. You were the one who pulled me back, just seconds before it detonated. I owe you my life. It's a debt I've never forgotten. So now, it's my turn. This war you're in, you will not fight it alone. I read the email 3 times, tears blurring the screen. It was like a flare in the darkness, a signal from a life I thought I'd left behind. The loyalty I had searched for in my own blood, I found in the bond of shared service, in a debt of honor from halfway across the world. It was real. It wasn't just a word Grandpa Jack had taught me. It was a living, breathing thing. David invited me to dinner at his house that evening. I was hesitant, feeling like an intruder on a peaceful life, but he insisted. His home was a small, neat house in a quiet Austin suburb, the kind with a basketball hoop in the driveway and toys scattered on the lawn. It was a million miles away from the cold, marble-floored museum I grew up in. The moment I stepped inside, I was hit with the warm smell of roasting chicken and the sound of children laughing. His wife, a kind-faced elementary school teacher named Sarah, greeted me with a warm hug. No questions asked. Their 2 young kids, a boy and a girl, peeked at me from behind their mother's legs with wide, curious eyes. There was no pity in their gazes, no awkward questions about the family drama. They just treated me like an old friend who had stopped by for dinner. We ate in their cozy kitchen. The meal wasn't a 10-course affair catered by chefs. It was Southern fried chicken, creamy potato salad, and green beans served on mismatched plates. It was the most delicious meal I'd had in years. We talked about their kids' soccer games, my time in the service, the absurdly hot Texas weather. For a few hours, I wasn't a disgraced daughter or a plaintiff in a lawsuit. I was just Emma. For the first time since that horrible wedding, I felt safe. I felt seen. After dinner, David walked me out to my car. I meant what I said, Captain, he told me, his tone serious. You're not alone. The brotherhood, it doesn't end when you take off the uniform. He was right. The next day, he introduced me to his family. It wasn't a support group that sat in a circle sharing their feelings. It was a network, a unit of veterans he trusted implicitly. He took me to a local VFW post, a simple, no-frills place that smelled of stale beer and camaraderie. There, I met a grizzled former Marine who was now a private investigator. After hearing my story for less than 5 minutes, he just grunted and said, "Give me their names. I'll find out where the bodies are buried, financially speaking." I met a former Air Force finance officer who now worked as a forensic accountant. She offered to look into my parents' business dealings, pro bono. And I met a former Army journalist who promised to hold my story, ready to deploy it with a major, reputable newspaper if things got dirty. Listening to them, a powerful realization washed over me. They didn't see a selfish girl, as my mother had called me. They saw a fellow soldier under attack, and their instinct was to form a perimeter and defend. This was a family forged in fire and loyalty, bound by a shared code of honor. It was the family Grandpa Jack had always told me about. I finally understood. Family isn't something you're born into. It's the people who fight alongside you in the trenches. The next morning, I met David at his law office. There were no fancy mahogany desks or abstract paintings on the walls. The only thing hanging behind his desk was a folded American flag in a display case, the very flag that had flown over our forward operating base in Afghanistan. It was a statement. This was a place where honor mattered more than billable hours. We spread everything out on his conference table. Grandpa Jack's will, the worn-out letters he'd given me, and the digital audio file of his final call. David leaned forward, his expression focused and intense. "They're accusing you of undue influence, Captain. That's a legal claim that you manipulated a vulnerable old man," he said, his voice sharp. "We're going to turn that accusation right back on them. We will prove that they were the ones who harassed and emotionally manipulated a decorated veteran in his final days for financial gain." He pointed to the audio file on my laptop. "Our primary weapon isn't just this recording, it's your character, your service record, your integrity." He looked me straight in the eye. "My job is to make sure the world sees the truth." For the first time, I didn't feel like I was on the defensive. I wasn't a victim reacting to their attacks. Sitting in that office, under the watch of that flag, with a true ally by my side, I was a soldier preparing for a counter-offensive. Hope, clear and strong, had returned. The week following my meeting with David and his network was the calm before the storm. For the first time, I felt a surge of confidence. We had a plan, we had a team, and we had the truth on our side. The first official move was quiet and professional. David drafted a formal legal letter, a cease and desist, and sent it to my parents and their lawyer. It was simple. Withdraw the frivolous lawsuit, stop all forms of harassment, and the matter could be settled out of the public eye. It was an offer of peace, a chance for them to walk away before things got ugly. Their response was anything but peaceful. It was a declaration of total war. The first volley came from my mother. She didn't respond through her lawyer. Instead, she left me a voicemail. It wasn't the voice of the polished Dallas socialite. It was a screeching, unhinged tirade filled with venom. "You ungrateful snake!" she shrieked, her voice distorted with rage. "You think you can threaten us? Me? I will ruin you, Emma. I will drag your name through the mud until no one will even look at you. I will see you destroyed in court." It was pure, unfiltered hatred. The second volley, from my father, was more insidious. He sent an email, not with anger, but with a condescending, paternal tone that made my skin crawl. "Emma," he wrote, "I'm disappointed. This isn't you. Let's be reasonable. We are prepared to offer you a settlement. You can keep your grandfather's sentimental little farm, and we'll even provide a small cash sum for your troubles. The rest, of course, must go to Madison, as your grandfather truly intended. Don't make this a messy public spectacle. It's not worth it." They still didn't get it. They thought they could buy my silence, buy my honor. They still thought this was about the money. But the main assault, the one designed for mass destruction, came from Madison. She launched her attack on the battlefield she knew best: Instagram. She posted a series of tearful videos, shot in perfect lighting with soft, sad music playing in the background. Her makeup was flawlessly smudged, her voice trembling as she spun a masterful tale of betrayal. "I never thought I'd have to do this," she sobbed to her hundreds of thousands of followers. "But my own sister, My sister, who was always so distant and calculating. She took advantage of our grandfather in his final, confused moments. She painted a picture of herself as the devoted granddaughter, robbed of her rightful inheritance by a cold, manipulative sibling who was jealous of her success. She played the part of the victim to perfection. The effect was immediate and devastating. Her followers, her Maddie mob, descended upon me. They found my old, barely used social media profiles and unleashed a torrent of hate. Hundreds, then thousands of comments flooded in. "You're a disgrace to the uniform. Thief, your own grandfather. What kind of monster does this to her own family? Enjoy the money you stole, you evil witch." They called me a predator, a disgrace to the army, a parasite. It was a digital mobbing, a public execution of my character orchestrated by my own sister. Every notification was another punch to the gut. The private war had just become brutally public. While Madison handled the court of public opinion, their legal team started their own dirty war in the shadows. David got a call from an old law school classmate who gave him a heads up. "David, watch your back," he said. "The Pearson lawyers are playing dirty. They're digging into your client's entire life. They're calling old high school friends, ex-boyfriends, even former professors, trying to find any dirt they can." David relayed the news to me, his jaw tight with anger. "They're trying to build a narrative," he explained. "They're manufacturing a story that you joined the military because you were psychologically troubled or couldn't fit into normal society. They're going to try and paint you as an unstable opportunist who preyed on a lonely old man." It was a sickening strategy, a scorched earth tactic designed to destroy my credibility and break my spirit. They weren't just attacking my claim to the inheritance, they were attacking the very foundations of my life, twisting my service into a symptom of a flawed character. I was reeling from it all, trying to hold on to the stoic principles Grandpa Jack had taught me, but the onslaught was relentless. Then the final blow landed. The one that crossed a line I didn't even know existed. David sent me a link with a simple message. "I'm so sorry, Captain." I clicked it. It was an article from a sleazy Dallas tabloid, the kind of paper you see in grocery store checkout lines. The headline was huge, sensational, and designed to cause maximum damage. "Army Hero or Family Fraud." The shocking story behind the Pearson fortune feud. The article was a masterpiece of character assassination, filled with anonymous quotes from sources close to the family. It painted me as a cold, calculating schemer who had abandoned her family for the military, only to return to swindle a dying man. But it was the photo they used that shattered my composure. They had placed two pictures side by side. On the right was a professionally shot photo of Madison, a single perfect tear rolling down her cheek. On the left was a picture of me. I was in my dress uniform, standing at attention during a ceremony. My face was stern, professional, resolute. My uniform, the symbol of my oath, my service, my entire identity. The one thing in my life that was pure, that was built on honor. And they had dragged it onto the front page of a gossip rag, twisting it into a mask for a monster. In that moment, something inside me snapped. All the pain, the hurt, the hope for a peaceful resolution, it all burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. It was what soldiers call battlefield clarity. The moment when all the noise fades away and you see the mission with perfect, lethal focus. They had crossed the final line. They had used my uniform, my honor, as a weapon against me. It was an unforgivable sacrilege. My hands were perfectly steady. My breathing was even. I picked up my phone and dialed David's number. He answered on the first ring. "I saw it, Captain," he said, his voice heavy with rage. "This is—" I cut him off. My voice was calm, devoid of all emotion. It was as cold and sharp as steel. "It's time, David. The defensive operation is over." I took a steadying breath. Release the recording. Staring at the tabloid on my screen, at the grotesque juxtaposition of my honor and their lies, I didn't shatter. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. Instead, a profound and terrifying calm washed over me. In the military, we have a name for it. Battlefield clarity. It's the moment in the heart of chaos when the universe seems to slow down. All the peripheral noise, the fear, the pain, the confusion, it all evaporates. The swirling storm of emotions that had been raging inside me for weeks, the grief, the betrayal, the desperate flicker of hope that they might change, it all went silent. All that remained was a single, cold, crystalline objective. They had crossed the final boundary. They had taken the most sacred thing I had, the uniform, the symbol of my oath to my country and my promise to my grandfather. And they had desecrated it. They had used it as a prop in their disgusting theater of greed. This was no longer a family dispute. They had not just attacked Emma Pearson, the daughter. They had attacked Captain Pearson, an officer of the United States Army. They had made my service, my identity, a casualty in their war. And that was a fatal mistake. My hand was rock steady as I picked up the phone and dialed David's number. He answered before the second ring. "I saw it, Captain," he said, his voice thick with a controlled fury. "This is unconscionable. It's—" "No," I said, cutting him off. My voice was level, precise, devoid of any tremble. It was the voice I used to give orders in the field. "It's a gift, David. They just handed us our justification. They fired the first public shot." I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. This is no longer a defensive action. They've escalated. Now, we retaliate. David was silent for a beat, recognizing the shift in my tone. "What are your orders, Captain?" "Prepare everything," I commanded. "Send the full, unedited audio recording to your contact at the Texas Tribune. I want it on the record. Then, I want you to draft a lawsuit for defamation and slander. We're not just defending the will anymore. We're going on the offensive. The gloves are off." After I hung up, a strange sense of liberation filled me. The part of me that had been clinging to a shred of hope, the little girl who still wanted her family's approval, died in that moment. And I was glad she was gone. It was time to burn the bridges, not out of anger, but out of necessity, to ensure there was no retreat. I sat down at my laptop and began a systematic, methodical purge. First, my mother. I found her contact in my phone. I stared at the name Mom for a second, then deleted it and typed in Diane Pearson. Then I blocked the number. No more screaming voicemails, no more poison. Next, my father. I blocked his number, I blocked his email. No more condescending offers of settlement. No more lectures on protecting a family reputation he himself had set on fire. Then, Madison. I went to Instagram, to her perfectly curated page of lies. I blocked her. I blocked her on every platform. The Maddie mob could no longer reach me. Their digital venom was cut off at the source. I went into my email account and typed Pearson into the search bar. Years of messages appeared. Birthday wishes that felt hollow. Holiday plans that were always centered around Madison. I selected all of them, every single one. And I clicked delete permanently. A digital lifetime of feigned affection, erased in a single click. My final act was the most satisfying. I walked over to the wall where the digital picture frame Madison had given me was still plugged in, its screen glowing with another picture of her perfect life. I unplugged it. The screen went black. I took it off the wall, walked it over to the motel room's trash can, and dropped it in. It landed with a cheap plastic clatter. A final, definitive end. Each action was a clean cut, a severing of a rotten tie. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I wasn't their sister. I was free. There is a moment in every fight when you stop taking the punches and you decide, with absolute clarity, that you are going to fight back. It's a feeling of pure, undiluted power. If you have ever reached that point, that moment when you knew you had to stand up for yourself, hit that like button. And let me know you stand with me by commenting the single word that says it all. Honor. But there was one more thing I had to do. One final bridge I needed to reinforce, not burn. I got in my car and started the drive to Grandpa Jack's farm. The Texas landscape rolled by, but I barely saw it. My mind was clear, my purpose set. I let myself into the old farmhouse, It smelled of him, of old books, wood smoke, and a faint hint of motor oil. I walked through the quiet rooms and out to his workshop, his sanctuary. Everything was just as he'd left it. Tools hung neatly on the pegboard walls. A half-finished engine sat on a stand, waiting for hands that would never return. On his workbench, next to a worn copy of Meditations, was a framed photo of him. He was a young man in the picture, standing proud in his army dress uniform, the same one he was buried in. A fine layer of dust had settled on the glass. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the outline of his face. With the sleeve of my shirt, I carefully, gently, wiped the dust away until his eyes were clear again. I stood at attention, holding the frame, and I looked right into his eyes. I spoke, not as his grieving granddaughter, but as a soldier reporting to her commanding officer. "Sir," I began, my voice steady and formal, "I have allowed sentiment to compromise the mission. I have been too lenient with the enemy. For that, I apologize." I took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of sawdust and honor. "But I give you my word, effective immediately, that this will be rectified. Your legacy will be protected. Our family's honor will be restored." I stood a little straighter. "I will complete the mission." It wasn't just a promise, it was a vow. And a soldier never ever breaks their vow. The moment I gave David the order, the atmosphere shifted. The quiet, methodical defense was over. We were now on the offensive, and David's law office transformed into a tactical operations center, a war room for what we internally began to call Operation Truth. The team David had assembled, my new chosen family, moved with the swift, quiet efficiency of a special forces unit. There was no panic, no chaos, just focused, professional execution. Our plan was a multi-front assault designed to dismantle my family's narrative of lies with an overwhelming barrage of undeniable facts. This wasn't going to be a messy, emotional battle fought in the tabloids. It was a clinical, strategic strike aimed at the heart of their credibility. David, acting as our lead strategist, began compiling a comprehensive legal dossier. It was more than just a file. It was an arsenal. It included a sworn affidavit from Maria, our former housekeeper, detailing years of conversations and observations. It contained the screaming, unhinged voicemail from my mother, a perfect exhibit of her unstable and harassing behavior. And thanks to Mike, the grizzled ex-Marine turned PI, it included detailed financial statements. His digging had uncovered what we suspected. My father's business was heavily leveraged, and they were drowning in debt. Madison's extravagant wedding hadn't been a celebration. It had been a desperate attempt to maintain the illusion of wealth. Grandpa Jack's inheritance wasn't just a bonus for them, it was a lifeline. Meanwhile, Joanna, the former Army journalist, was drafting the centerpiece of our public campaign. She wasn't writing for a gossip blog. Her target was the Texas Tribune, a highly respected, nonprofit investigative news organization known for its deep dives into politics and policy. Her article wasn't a hit piece, it was a meticulously sourced investigative report. This was crucial. By choosing a serious outlet, we ensured the story would be framed not as a salacious family feud, but as a serious matter of elder abuse and legal malpractice. With the components of the operation in motion, David and I sat down in his office for the most difficult part, analyzing our key piece of intelligence: the final recording of my grandfather. I took a deep breath and pressed play. The audio was slightly distorted by the static of the phone line, but his voice, though frail, was unmistakably clear. It was the voice of a man tired of fighting. "They just keep pushing, Emma," he sighed, the weariness evident in every word. "Your mother, she keeps talking about the debts, about Madison's wedding. She has a way of making me feel guilty, like I'm letting everyone down." He coughed, a dry, rattling sound that pained me to hear. "But I know you're the only one who understands, sweetheart. You won't sell the land. You won't sell our history. Promise me you'll keep it safe." Listening to it again, with the clarity of battle in my mind, I didn't feel sadness. I felt a cold, righteous anger. This recording wasn't just evidence of my innocence, it was a confession of their guilt, a documentation of their relentless, desperate manipulation. It was my grandfather's verbal last will and testament. It was his final order. Our case was strong, but it was about to get a shot of adrenaline from an unexpected source. Maria, our housekeeper, after being unceremoniously fired by my mother for the crime of calling me, agreed to give a formal, videotaped deposition. She sat across from David, nervous but resolute. She recounted in heartbreaking detail, overhearing my mother on the phone with their lawyer months before my grandfather passed. She'd heard Diane discussing strategies to have him declared mentally incompetent. She said, "We need to establish a pattern of confusion," Maria recalled, her voice trembling. She was planning it for a long time. She also testified to Madison's visits. They were never more than 5 minutes long. Madison would walk in, snap a smiling selfie by Grandpa Jack's bedside for her Instagram story, and walk out, often not even speaking a full sentence to him. Maria's testimony was a live grenade thrown into the heart of their narrative. It was proof of premeditated deceit from a trusted, inside source they never saw coming. The final piece of our strategy came from a surprising new ally. David was friends with a public policy professor at the University of Texas at Austin, a brilliant man who had served for 2 decades as a high-level official at the Pentagon, specializing in information warfare. We met with him for coffee. After listening to the entire story, the professor looked at me, his eyes sharp and analytical. "Captain," he said, "your family is fighting a war of noise. They are loud, emotional, and chaotic. You must do the opposite." He leaned in. "Once your evidence is public, you will go completely silent. No interviews, no social media posts, no public statements. You will let the facts speak for themselves." His advice resonated deeply with the Stoic principles Grandpa Jack had taught me from Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. In an information war, the professor continued, the loudest voice is rarely the one that wins. The winner is the one who has the truth and the discipline to let it work. Let them scream. Let them panic. Let them self-destruct in the face of the facts. His counsel solidified our entire approach. We wouldn't engage in their mudslinging. We would rise above it. We would present the truth with the cold, undeniable force of a legal brief, and then we would step back and allow the world to be the judge. The night before the launch of Operation Truth, the entire team gathered in David's office one last time. Every piece was in place. The legal complaint for defamation was filed. The dossier of evidence was complete. Joanna had submitted her article to her editor at the Tribune. A press conference was scheduled. David looked at me, a determined glint in his eye. He gave me a single, crisp nod. "It's all set, Captain," he said, his voice low and steady. "The article goes live online tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. The press conference is at 10. A countdown had begun. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the quiet of my motel room, watching the clock on my phone tick towards 7 a.m. It felt like the final moments before a mission launch. A tense, electric silence where the entire world seems to hold its breath. I wasn't scared. I wasn't anxious. I was ready. At exactly 7 a.m., my phone buzzed with a notification from the news app Joanna had told me to download. The headline was stark, professional, and devastatingly effective. Pearson inheritance dispute. Recording reveals. Pressure on decorated veteran in final days. I clicked the link. The article was a masterclass in investigative journalism. It laid out the facts objectively, chronologically, without melodrama. It detailed the lawsuit, my parents' claims, and then it presented the evidence. There was a direct link to the full audio file of my last call with Grandpa Jack. There were embedded screenshots of my mother's threatening voicemails, and there were key quotes from Maria's sworn affidavit painting a damning picture of premeditation and deceit. The story hit the digital world like a shockwave. Within the first hour, it became the most read, most shared article on the Texas Tribune. It was picked up by local news affiliates, then by national news aggregators. Across the sprawling, manicured suburbs of North Dallas, in the high-rise offices downtown, the elite of Texas society woke up, checked their phones, and were served a piping hot scandal with their morning coffee. The carefully constructed facade of the Pearson family had just been blown to pieces. At 10 o'clock, David held his press conference. I watched the live stream from my laptop. He walked to the podium, calm and composed in a simple, dark suit. He didn't look like a lawyer hungry for a fight. He looked like a soldier on a solemn duty. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make accusations. He simply presented the facts. "We are here today to present the truth," he began, his voice steady. He laid out the timeline. Then he played the most critical 30-second clip of my grandfather's recording for the assembled reporters. The sound of my grandfather's weary, manipulated voice filled the room. A visible ripple of shock went through the press corps. When the questions started, they were fired like bullets. "Where is Captain Pearson now?" one reporter shouted. David's response was measured and powerful. "Captain Pearson has followed the advice of her counsel and will not be making a public statement at this time," he said. "She believes the evidence speaks for itself. Her focus, now and always, is on her duty and on honoring the true legacy of her grandfather, a man who served this country with distinction." The contrast was devastating. On one side, you had my family's loud, hysterical, and public attacks. On the other, you had a quiet, decorated Army captain and her veteran lawyer, calmly presenting the truth with discipline and honor. The court of public opinion, which had been so quick to condemn me, delivered its new verdict in a matter of minutes. The social media reversal was a digital tsunami. The Maddie mob, which had been so vicious in their attacks, turned on their queen. Madison's comment section, once a curated garden of praise, became a toxic wasteland of outrage. "Hypocrite! You used your dying grandfather for clicks? You're disgusting. How dare you attack your sister when she's serving our country?" The hashtags began to trend nationwide. First, Pearson scandal. Then the one that made tears spring to my eyes. Justice for Captain Pearson. The corporate sponsors who had built Madison's brand ran for the exits. The boutique clothing line she promoted issued a statement suspending their partnership. The wellness tea company whose products she peddled announced they were reevaluating their brand ambassadors to align with their core values of family and integrity. Her carefully constructed digital empire, built on a foundation of curated authenticity, crumbled into dust in less than 3 hours. The fallout for my father was just as swift, though it happened in the more private, but no less brutal arenas of high-stakes business. His phone began to ring, and it didn't stop. It was the other members of his board demanding an emergency meeting. It was his partners at the country club asking awkward questions in hushed, judgmental tones. It was the bank that held the loans on his struggling company, suddenly very interested in the reputational risk of their client. The good name he had spent a lifetime building, the reputation he was willing to sacrifice his own daughter for, had evaporated by lunchtime. Late that afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID read, Gary Pearson. I let it ring 3 times, then I answered. I said nothing. "Emma?" His voice was ragged, stripped of all its usual arrogance. It was the voice of a man in freefall. "Emma, what have you done?" he pleaded. "The company, the board, everyone is calling. You're destroying this family. You have to stop this. Call it off. Tell them it's a misunderstanding." "Whatever you want, Emma. You want the money? You can have the money. Just make this stop." I listened to his frantic, pathetic bargaining in complete silence. The man who had threatened me, who had erased me, was now begging me to save him. When he finally ran out of breath, I spoke. My voice was calm, devoid of any anger, any pain, any emotion at all. It was the voice of a stranger. "I only ever wanted the truth, Mr. Pearson," I said, using his surname like a blade, severing the final thread of our connection. "Now, everyone has it." I paused. "Don't ever call me again. From now on, any and all communication will go through my attorney." And with that, I hung up. I ended the last conversation I would ever have with my father. My phone immediately began to buzz again. The screen lit up with my mother's name. It buzzed once, twice. I watched it vibrate on the cheap motel table, a frantic, desperate plea from a world I no longer belonged to. I let it ring until it went to voicemail, the sound of their panic finally becoming what it always should have been. Just distant, irrelevant noise. The storm didn't end with a bang, but with a quiet, gradual fizzle. In the weeks that followed, the world moved on. The hashtags faded, the news cycle found new scandals, and the intense glare of the public spotlight slowly dimmed. David kept me updated on the fallout. His reports delivered with a professional, dispassionate tone. As predicted, the Pearson family quietly withdrew their lawsuit. There was no apology, no admission of guilt, just a silent retreat from a battlefield they had so arrogantly created. The consequences, however, were unavoidable. David sent me a link to a business journal announcing my father's forced resignation as chairman of the board. My mother, once the queen bee of Dallas society, became a pariah. Invitations to charity galas dried up. Her calls to former friends went unreturned. She was socially exiled, trapped in the gilded cage she prized above all else. And Madison, she simply vanished. Her Instagram account, a vibrant monument to a fictional life, was deleted. Her brand, her career, her entire public identity, erased. They had craved the spotlight and gotten it, just not in the way they'd ever imagined. Listening to these updates, I expected to feel a surge of triumph, a satisfying sense of victory. But I didn't. There was no joy, no glee. There was only a profound, hollow emptiness. It was like watching a necessary demolition in slow motion. I found myself mourning the ruins of a flawed structure that had, nonetheless, been part of my life's landscape. I was sad for the family we could have been, for the love that should have existed but never did. I was sad for a family that had so completely self-destructed in its worship of greed and image. The war was over, but the emotional debris was still everywhere. To clear it, I knew I had to perform one final personal act of closure. One evening, I sat at the small desk in my motel room with a pen and a single sheet of paper. I needed to write a letter, not to be sent, but to be written. A letter to my mother. I didn't write it in anger. The rage had burned itself out, leaving only the cold, hard truth. Mother, I began. You taught me that love was conditional, a prize to be earned through perfection. You taught me a woman's value was measured by her appearance and the status of the man by her side. I spent my life trying to prove you wrong, trying to build a life based on honor, hoping one day you would finally see me. I paused, the words flowing with painful clarity. But I realize now, I don't need to prove anything to you. My worth isn't up for your debate. I don't forgive you for what you did, because it was wrong. But I do forgive you for not being the mother I needed, for not having the capacity to love unconditionally. And in forgiving you for your limitations, I am finally releasing myself. I'm freeing myself from a lifetime of waiting for a love that was never going to come. When I finished, I read the words aloud to the empty room. Then I folded the paper, took it outside into the cool Texas night, and with a lighter from my glove compartment, set it on fire. I watched as the paper curled, the words turning to black ash before being carried away by the breeze. I wasn't just burning a letter. I was incinerating a lifetime of hope and hurt. I was letting it all go. A week later, David received a call from the Pearsons' lawyer about the disposition of personal effects. They had frantically retrieved the boxes from the curb and wanted to arrange their return. They want to know where to send them, David told me. They asked if you wanted to meet. No, I said, the answer immediate and absolute. Tell them to have the boxes delivered to Grandpa Jack's farm and left on the porch. I will not see them, not now, not ever. The boundary was drawn. Clear, final. I drove to the farm the next day. The cardboard boxes were stacked neatly on the porch, a silent, pathetic offering. On top of one, there was a small folded piece of notepaper. It was my father's handwriting, shaky and frail. 2 words. I'm sorry. I stared at the note. 2 words scribbled on paper, an apology born not of remorse, but of defeat. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't a repair. It was just an acknowledgement. A sad final period at the end of a long, painful sentence. I folded the note carefully and put it in my pocket. It was over. That evening, I told David about the note over dinner. Should I forgive them? I asked, the question feeling heavy. David put down his fork, his expression thoughtful. Captain, he said warmly, in the Army, after every operation, we conduct an after-action review, an AAR. The purpose isn't to assign blame. It's to identify lessons learned so we can move forward, smarter and stronger. He looked at me, his gaze direct and kind. Maybe that's what forgiveness is for people like us. It isn't saying, what you did was okay. It's not for them. It's for you. It's you, conducting your own AAR, saying to yourself, the lesson has been learned. This battle is over. And I will not allow it to occupy another inch of my territory or another second of my life. His words clicked into place, a key turning a lock I didn't know was there. He had given me a new definition. Forgiveness wasn't about pardoning them. It was about liberating myself. I didn't need to forgive them for what they did. I just needed to forgive myself for ever expecting them to be something they never could be. That night, for the first time, the future didn't feel like a continuation of the past. It felt like a blank page. I opened my laptop, the screen a bright beacon in the dark room. I navigated to a website I'd bookmarked weeks ago, a page I hadn't had the courage to look at until now. It was the application portal for the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. My finger hovered over the mouse, and then, with a sense of quiet, profound peace, I clicked Start New Application. 6 months later, the world looked different, softer. I was walking through the historic red-bricked grounds of Harvard Yard in Cambridge, Massachusetts, a crisp autumn wind rustling through the golden leaves. The air didn't smell of Dallas money or Texas heat. It smelled of old books, damp earth, and the promise of intellectual pursuit. There were no ghosts here, just history. I was no longer Captain Pearson, a soldier on the defensive. I was just Emma, a graduate student in a comfortable pair of jeans and a worn wool sweater. Using the GI Bill my grandfather's service had earned for me, I had been accepted into the Master in Public Policy program at the prestigious John F. Kennedy School of Government. My uniform was packed away, a relic of a life I honored but had moved beyond. My new mission was here, in these hallowed halls. I was learning to serve my country in a new way, not with a rifle, but with policy and legislation. I was studying the very systems that are supposed to protect veterans like my grandfather, learning how to strengthen them, to ensure that no soldier ever has to fight their final battles alone, manipulated by the greedy and the desperate. The intellectual rigor of New England was a healing balm, thousands of miles and a lifetime away from the brittle glamour of Dallas. Before I left Texas, David and I had one final piece of business. We officially established the Jack Pearson Legacy Foundation. My inheritance wasn't a jackpot to be spent. It was seed capital for a new mission. We used a significant portion of the funds to create vocational scholarships and small business grants for veterans transitioning back to civilian life. We wanted to give them the tools to build their own futures, just as my grandfather had taught me to build mine. And the farm, his sanctuary, was never in danger of being sold. It was transformed. It is now the Pearson Valor Center, a retreat and training facility where veterans can come to find their footing. The old barn, once filled with rusted tools, is now a fully equipped workshop where they can learn new skills like mechanics, carpentry, and welding. The main house is a place for counseling and quiet reflection. We turned my grandfather's physical legacy, his land, his home, into a living one, an engine of healing and opportunity for his brothers and sisters in arms. His spirit was more alive there now than it had ever been. My chosen family, the one forged in the fire of my personal war, remained my anchor. I had a weekly video call with David, Sarah, and their kids, their laughter and chaotic family life a welcome dose of normalcy that bridged the distance between Austin and Cambridge. My new life wasn't a solitary one, either. I had found a new unit here, a small group of fellow veterans in my program at the Kennedy School. For my first Thanksgiving on the East Coast, I didn't fly back to a home that no longer existed. I made a new one. I hosted a small dinner in my tiny Cambridge apartment. The guest list was my new family, a former Marine pilot, a Navy SEAL, and an Air Force cyber warfare officer. We crowded into my small kitchen, cooking together, the small space filled with laughter and the rich smells of roast turkey and sage stuffing. We shared stories, not of the traumas of war, but of the absurdities of transitioning from the battlefield to the classroom. We didn't talk about the families we'd lost or left behind. We celebrated the one we were building, right there, in that moment. It was then I fully understood the truth Grandpa Jack had tried to teach me. Family is not a birthright. It is a daily act of construction, built on a foundation of mutual respect, unwavering loyalty, and genuine love. The final scene of my old life played out not in a courtroom or a battlefield, but in the profound silence of a library. I was sitting at a long oak table in the magnificent reading room of Widener Library, surrounded by millions of books, a cathedral of human knowledge. The weight of all that history felt comforting, not crushing. From my bag, I took out the small folded piece of notepaper my father had left for me on that box of my discarded life. I unfolded it and looked at the two words, "one last time." "I'm sorry." The shaky, defeated script of a fallen king. Then I took out the worn, dog-eared copy of Meditations that my grandfather had given me so long ago. Its pages were filled with his pencil-scrawled notes and underlined passages. I could almost feel the warmth of his hands on the cracked leather cover. I opened the book to a random page and gently placed my father's note inside, letting it rest between the ancient words of wisdom. I wasn't enshrining it, I wasn't even forgiving it, I was just filing it away. It was a part of my story, a lesson learned, a data point in my personal after-action review. I closed the book, the note now a permanent, silent bookmark in my past. I would not live in that past, but I would learn from it. I would carry its lessons with me. I remembered one of the quotes my grandfather had underlined twice. It was from Marcus Aurelius. "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." A small smile touched my lips. My victory wasn't in their destruction, but in my own creation. I had refused to become like them, bitter, greedy, and empty. Instead, I had chosen to build. I built a foundation to help others. I built a new family based on love. I was building a new life dedicated to service and purpose. By living a life of peace, by living a life of meaning, by living a life of honor, I had truly won. I was, finally and completely, living his legacy. And so, my story isn't one of revenge. It's one of reclamation. It's about taking the broken pieces and building something stronger, something true. My grandfather taught me that honor isn't just a word, but a way of living. Thank you for following my journey and for sharing your own stories of strength in the comments. Your support has been a powerful reminder that we are never truly alone. If you believe in the power of resilience in creating your own family, please hit that subscribe button and join our community. Together, we can share more stories that inspire and empower